Study Session 8, Juvenile Corrections. Introduction. There is a wide choice of correctional treatments available for juveniles. This can be subdivided into two major categories: community treatment and institutional treatment. These efforts include probation, treatment services such as individual and group counseling, restitution, and other programs. Community treatment also refers to the use of privately maintained residences, such as foster homes, small group homes, and boarding schools, which are located in the community. In this study session, you will examine juvenile probation, the nature, condition, organization and administration of probation, and duties of juvenile probation officers. Learning outcomes. When you have studied this session, you should be able to 1. Define and use the term probation correctly. 2. Point out arguments in favor of probation. 3. Describe the nature of probation. 4. Highlight the conditions of probation. 5. Explain the organization and administration of probation. 6. Highlight new community probation programs. 7. Discuss non-community probation programs. 1. The nature of probation. Probation refers to non-punitive legal disposition for delinquent youths, which emphasizes treatment without incarceration. In other words, it is a non-punitive legal disposition for juveniles with particular focus on community treatment in which the juvenile is closely supervised by an officer of the court and must adhere to a strict set of rules to avoid incarceration. Probation has the following nature. 1. In the majority of jurisdictions, probation is a direct judicial order that allows a youth who is found to be a delinquent or status offender to remain in the community under court-ordered supervision. A probation sentence implies a contract between the court and the juvenile. The court promises to hold a period of institutionalization in abeyance. The juvenile promises to adhere to a set of rules mandated by the court. If the rules are violated, and especially if the juvenile commits another offense, the probation may be revoked. In that case, the contract is terminated and the original commitment order may be enforced. 3. The rules of probation vary, but they typically involve conditions such as attending school or work, keeping regular hours, remaining in the jurisdiction, and staying out of trouble. 4. In the juvenile court, probation is often ordered for an indefinite period, depending on the statutes of the jurisdiction, the seriousness of the offense, and the juvenile's adjustment on probation. Youths can remain under supervision until the court no longer has jurisdiction over them, that is, when they reach the age of majority. 5. In most jurisdictions, the status of probation is reviewed regularly to ensure that a juvenile is not kept on probation needlessly. Generally, discretion lies with the probation officer to discharge youths who are adjusting to the treatment plan. 2. Argument in favor of probation. Traditional probation is still the backbone of community-based correction. The following arguments are in favor of probation. 1. For youths who can be supervised in the community, probation represents an appropriate disposition. 2. Probation allows the court to tailor a program to each juvenile offender, including those involved in person-oriented homes. 3. The justice system continues to have confidence in rehabilitation while accommodating demands for legal controls and public protection, even when caseloads may include many more serious offenders than in the past. 4. Probation is often the disposition of choice, particularly for status offenders. Charles, 2001. 3. Conditions of probation. 1. Probation conditions are rules mandating that a juvenile on probation behavior in a particular way. They can include restitution or reparation, intensive supervision, intensive counseling, participation in a therapeutic program, or participation in an educational or vocational training program. In addition to these specific conditions, state statutes generally allow courts to insist that probationers lead law-abiding lives, maintain a residence in a family, refrain from associating with certain types of people, and remain in a particular area unless they have permission to leave. 2. Probation conditions vary, but they are never supposed to be capricious, cruel, or beyond the capacity of the juvenile to satisfy. Furthermore, conditions of probation should relate to the crime that was committed and to the conduct of the youth. 3. Courts have invalidated probation conditions that were harmful or that violated the juvenile's due process rights, restricting a young person's movement, insisting on a mandatory program of treatment, ordering indefinite terms of probation, and demanding financial reparation where this is impossible are all grounds for appellate court review. For example, it would not be appropriate for a probation order to bar a youth from visiting his girlfriend unless he had threatened or harmed her, merely because her parents objected to the relationship. 4. If a youth violates the conditions of probation or breaks the laws again, the court can revoke probation. The juvenile court ordinarily handles a decision to revoke probation. Today, as a result of Supreme Court decisions dealing with the rights of adult probationers, a juvenile is normally entitled to legal representation and a hearing when a violation of probation occurs. Maurice v. Brewer, 1973. 4. Organization and administration. Probation services are administered by the local juvenile court or by the State Administrative Office of Courts in 23 states and the District of Columbia. In another 14 states, juvenile probation services are split, with the juvenile court having control in urban countries and the state executive serving in smaller countries. About 10 states have a statewide office of juvenile probation located in the executive branch. In 3 states, country executives administer probation. These agencies employ an estimated 18,000 juvenile probation officers throughout the United States. Tobet, 1996. In the typical juvenile probation department, the chief probation officer is central to its effective operation. In addition, large probation departments include one or more assistant chiefs, each of whom is responsible for one aspect of probation service. One assistant chief might oversee training, another might supervise special offender groups, and still another might act as liaison with police or community service agencies. Although juvenile probation services continue to be predominantly organized under the judiciary, recent legislative activity has been in the direction of transferring those services from the local juvenile court judge to a state court administrative office. Whether local juvenile courts or state agencies should administer juvenile probation services is debatable. In years past, the organization of probation services depended primarily on the size of the program and the number of juveniles under its supervision. Due to this momentum to develop unified court systems, many juvenile court services are being consolidated into state court systems. Tobet, 1996. Siegel, Welsh and Senna, 2003. 5. Duties of Juvenile Probation Officer. The Juvenile Probation Officer plays an important role in the justice process, beginning with intake and continuing throughout the period in which a juvenile is under court supervision. Juvenile Probation Officer is the officer of the court involved in all 4 stages of the court process: intake, predisposition, post-adjudication, and post-disposition, who assists the courts and supervises juveniles placed on probation. 5.1. Intake. At intake, the Juvenile Probation Officer screens complaints by deciding to adjust the matter, refers the juvenile to an agency for service, or refers the case to the court for judicial action. At intake, the probation staff has preliminary discussions with the juvenile and the family to determine whether court intervention is necessary or whether the matter can be better resolved by some form of social service. If the juvenile is placed in a detention facility, the probation officer helps the court decide whether the juvenile should continue to be held or released pending the adjudication and disposition of the case. If the juvenile is placed in a detention facility, the probation officer helps the court decide whether the juvenile should continue to be held or released pending the adjudication and disposition of the case. 5.2. Predispositional duty. In this case, the probation officer exercises tremendous influence over the youth and the family by developing a report and submitting it to the court. This report is a clinical diagnosis of the youth's problems and of the need for court assistance based on an evaluation of social functioning, personality, and environmental issues. The report includes an analysis of the child's feelings about the violations and their capacity for change. It also examines the influence of family members, peers, and other environmental influences in producing and possibly resolving the problems. All of this information is brought together in a complex but meaningful picture of the offender's personality, problems, and environment. 5.3. Post-adjudication. At the post-adjudication stage, the probation officer assists the court in reaching its dispositional decision. They assist following the report submitted to the court. 5.4. Post-dispositional stage. At the post-disposition, the probation officer supervises juveniles placed on probation. They also provide the youth with supervision and treatment in the community. Treatment plans vary in terms of approach and structure. Some juveniles simply report to the probation officer and follow the conditions of probation. In other cases, the probation officer may need to provide extensive counseling to the youth and family, or more typically, refer them to other social service agencies, such as Drug Treatment Center. Siegel, Welsh and Senna, 2003. 6. New community correction. The new programs as community corrections or alternative sanctions to incarceration of juveniles are discussed as follows. 6.1. Intensive supervision. Juvenile Intensive Probation Supervisions, JIPS, involves treating offenders who would normally have been sent to a secure treatment facility as part of a very small probation caseload that receives almost daily scrutiny. Weibush, 1993. 6.2. Primary goal of JIPS: decarceration. Without intensive supervision, youngsters would normally be sent to secure juvenile facilities that are already overcrowded. Control. High-risk juvenile offenders can be maintained in the community under much closer security than traditional probation efforts can provide. Maintaining community ties and integration. Offenders can remain in the community and complete their education while avoiding the pains of imprisonment. Intensive probation programs has mixed reviews. Some jurisdictions find that they are more successful than traditional probation supervision and come at a much cheaper cost than incarceration. However, most research indicates that the failure rate is high and that younger offenders who commit petty crimes are the most likely to fail when placed in intensive supervision programs. Ryan, 1997, Siegel, Welsh, and Senna, 2003. 6.3. Electronic monitoring. This is another program which has been used with adult offenders and is finding its way into the juvenile justice system. It involves house arrest, which is often coupled with electronic monitoring. This program allows offenders sentenced to probation to remain in the community on condition that they stay at home during specific periods, for example, after school or work, or weekends and in the evenings. Offenders may be monitored through random phone calls, visits, or, in some jurisdictions, electronic devices. Types of electronic systems. These are the types of electronic systems used. A. Active systems. B. Passive systems. Active systems monitor the offender by continuously sending a signal back to the central office. If an offender leaves home at an unauthorized time, the signal is broken and the failure recorded. In contrast, passive systems usually involve random phone calls generated by computers to which the juvenile offender must respond within a particular time, for example, 30 seconds. Most systems employ radio transmitters that receive a signal from a device worn by the offender and relay it back to the computer via telephone lines. In addition, home arrest is another device used in monitoring pretrial detainees to ensure they remain in a home environment with supervision. In other words, house arrest is a condition by which an offender is required to stay at home during specific periods of time. Monitoring is done by random phone calls and visits or by electronic devices. Advantages of electronic monitoring. Electronic monitoring combined with house arrest has the following advantages. It has the benefits of relatively low cost and high security. B. It helps offenders avoid imprisonment in overcrowded, dangerous state facilities. C. Fewer supervisory officers are needed to handle large number of offenders. Disadvantages of electronic monitoring. Electronic monitoring has the following drawbacks. A. Existing systems can be affected by faulty telephone equipment. B. Most electronic or house arrest programs do not provide rehabilitation services. C. Some believe electronic monitoring is contrary to a citizen's right to privacy. Restitution. This is also known as victim restitution. Victim restitution is another widely used method of community treatment. In most jurisdictions, restitution is part of a probationary sentence and is administered by the country probation staff. In many jurisdictions, independent restitution programs have been set up by local governments. In others, restitution is administered by a private non-profit organization, Scheider and Warner, 1989. Types of restitution. Restitution can take several forms. This includes monetary restitution, victim service restitution, and community service restitution. Monetary restitution. This is a requirement that juvenile offenders compensate crime victims for out-of-pocket losses caused by the crime, including property damage, lost wages, and medical expenses. Victim service restitution. This is a situation whereby the juvenile offender is required to provide some service directly to the crime victim. Victim service restitution. This is a situation whereby the juvenile offender is required to provide some service directly to the crime victim. Community service restitution. This is a situation whereby the juvenile offender is required to assist some worthwhile community organization for a period of time. Advantages of restitutions. 1. It provides alternative sentencing options. 2. It offers monetary compensation or service to crime victims. 3. It allows the juvenile the opportunity to compensate the victim and takes a step toward becoming a productive member of society. 4. It helps relieve overcrowded juvenile courts, probation caseloads, and detention facilities. And 5. Restitution has the potential for allowing vast savings in the operation of the juvenile justice system. However, monetary restitution programs in particular may improve the public's attitude towards juvenile justice by offering equity to the victims of crime and ensuring that offenders take responsibility for their actions. Disadvantages of restitution. The following are the two main disadvantages of restitution. 1. Restitution supports retribution rather than rehabilitation because it emphasizes justice for the victim and criminal responsibility for illegal acts. And 2. It creates penalties for juvenile offenders where none existed before. 6.5. Residential community treatment. This is another community correction whereby youths are placed under probation supervision, and the probation department maintains a residential treatment facilities. Placement can also be made to the Department of Social Services or Juvenile Corrections with the direction that the youth be placed in a residential facility. Residential programs. These are placements of juvenile offenders in a residential, non-secure facilities such as a group home, foster home, family group home, or rural home where juvenile can be closely monitored and develop close relationships with staff members. Group homes. These are non-secure residences that provide counseling, educating, job training, and family living. They are staffed by a small number of qualified persons and generally house 12 to 15 youngsters. The youth are given the opportunity to build a close relationship with the staff. Youths reside in the home, attend public schools, and participate in community activities in the area. Foster care programs. This involves juveniles who are orphans or whose parents cannot care for them. They are placed with families who provide the attention, guidance, and care they did not receive at home. The quality of the foster home experience depends on the foster parents. Welfare departments generally handle foster placements, and funding of this treatment option has been a problem for the juvenile justice system. However, foster home services have expanded as a community treatment approach. Foster care families also receive close supervision and are consulted regularly on the progress of the youth by program staff. Family group homes. These combine elements of foster care and group home placements. In this case, juveniles are placed in a group home that is run by a family rather than by professional staff. Troubled youths have an opportunity to learn to get along in a family-like situation. 6. Rural program. These include forestry camps, ranches, and farms that provide recreational activities or work for juveniles. Programs typically handle from 30 to 50 youths. Such programs have the disadvantages of isolating juveniles from the community, but reintegration can be achieved if the youth's stay is short and if family and friends are allowed to visit. Most residential programs use group counseling as the major treatment tool, although group facilities have been used less often than institutional placements. There is a trend towards developing community-based residential facilities. 8.7. Non-residential community treatment. In non-residential programs, youths remain in their homes and receive counseling, education, employment, diagnostic, and casework services. Family therapy, educational tutoring, and job placement may all be part of the program. 7.1. Advantages of community-based programs. 1. Both residential and non-residential settings produce comparable or lower recidivism rates. Youths in non-secure settings are less likely to become recidivists than those placed in more secure settings. 2. Community treatment was based on poor delivery of services such as shabby operation and hazard management, follow-up, and planning. 3. There was inadequate operation of community treatment programs based in part on the absence of uniform policies and procedures and the lack of accountability. 7.2. Characteristics of community-based programs. 1. It is comprehensive, dealing with many aspects of youth's lives. 2. It is intensity, involving multiple contacts. 3. It is operational, even outside the justice system. 4. Its foundation is based upon youth's strength. And 5. It adopts a socially grounded approach to understanding a juvenile situation rather an individual level approach. Chris Berg, Corey, and Onek, 1995. However, as jurisdictions continue to face high rates of violent juvenile crime and ever-increasing costs for juvenile justice services, community-based programs will play an important role in providing rehabilitation of juvenile offenders and ensuring public safety. Siegel, Welsh, and Senna, 2003. Study session summary. In this study session, we explored the concept of probation and the argument in favor of probation. We further examined the conditions, organization, and administration of probation, and finally explained the duties of juvenile probation officers such as intake, predisposition, post-adjudication, and post-disposition. Finally, we describe the new programs as community corrections or alternative sanctions to incarceration of juveniles. These include intensive supervision, electronic monitoring restitution, residential community treatment, and non-residential community treatment. End of study session 8. Thank you for listening.